It's still so wild to me that we built an entire electric, global telecommunications network, one that would let you send a message from Texas to Algeria in a couple of minutes before we'd even seen the entire globe. Obviously, there were big chunks of it that we weren't too familiar with until recently, like Antarctica, but even if we couldn't accurately map it in detail a couple hundred years ago, we at least knew it was there. We cannot say the same about Severnaya Zemlya. Time after time, explorers and surveyors were in the general vicinity, but they just totally whiffed on it. They never sailed close enough to notice it. It wasn't until 1913 that a Russian expedition finally caught a glance. These islands combined to form a landmass larger than the state of Massachusetts, and we got well into the 20th century without having any idea it was even there. So it feels a little out of order that more than a half century prior, in the mid-1800s, we built a worldwide telecommunications grid that was well on its way to reaching every populated landmass on the planet. But if you've ever taken on any kind of home improvement project, you might be able to relate. You do stuff out of order, you don't read the instruction manual, or if you do, you don't bother to give it a cursory skim before beginning. You don't learn or plan, you just jump right into the fun part. Maybe I'm projecting, maybe that's just me. But that's often how these early telegraph companies did it too. Their chief decision makers were people who annoyed each other. They betrayed, cheated, stole from one another. They would cut every corner they could possibly cut. They got sloppy. They screwed up all the time. Some were legitimate scientists and engineers, even brilliant ones. Others skated by on pure experience. Still others had neither knowledge nor experience. They were just loud. And despite all of that, they still, together, somehow made it happen. How? Well, it's a different time. Does everybody know what time it is? Come on, you're the studio audience. You're supposed to know what time it is. Let's try this again. Does everybody know what time it is? Within every last sketchy business partnership, every Binford Tools, there was always a Tim the Toolman Taylor, an impulsive, self-centered tryhard who, despite his crafted everyman image, suspiciously felt most comfortable in a necktie, who regarded his identity as a performance that needed to be maintained and strung along between every waking moment and the next. And there was always an Al Borland, a mature, highly proficient, even-handed, and counterbalancing figure whose identity was effortless and casual as your favorite flannel shirt. What Al would build, Tim would tear asunder for Al to put back together. Strangely, they often needed one another, and sometimes even liked one another, but in the end, in every case, there was a winner and a loser. Some became legends, institutions, principles, units of measurement were named after them. Statues were made of them that still stand to this day. And as for some others, I don't think so, Tim. The story of the development of the worldwide telegraph network of the mid-19th century will be told in 4 chapters. Within, we will encounter a wretched Tim, an impulsive Tim, and a catastrophic Tim, as well as a craftsman Al, a noble Al, and a transformational Al. So what does it mean to be a Tim, and what does it mean to be an Al? If the long-running 1990s sitcom Home Improvement was before your time, after your time, or you just never bothered to watch it, what you missed was a somewhat conventional, family-friendly ratings juggernaut. In terms of viewership, its only real competition during its peak was Seinfeld. But while Seinfeld is widely quoted, referenced, streamed, and syndicated 30 years later, we've pretty much moved on from Home Improvement. To explore why, let's consider similarly popular 1990s sitcoms that you're likely to find next time you flip around on a hotel room TV. Friends doesn't have one main character, it has 6, and they all share the spotlight fairly evenly. Seinfeld is nominally about one guy, but he's surrounded by co-main characters who are funnier than he is. The King of Queens offers a nucleus of 3 primary inherently funny characters who themselves are surrounded by strong supporting characters with plenty of their own goofs and stuff they got going on. The Fresh Prince does revolve entirely around Will, but it completely works because he's such a cool and likable guy, and his supporting cast is both strong and perfectly tailored around him. Tim the Toolman Taylor is the nucleus around which everything and everyone else revolves. Without him, there is zero comedy, conflict, or story to tell. Without him, his wife Jill would be a pleasant, capable woman who pursues a career in psychology. Her kids would be the same three mostly interchangeable kids who do regular kid stuff. Their next-door neighbor Wilson dispenses delightful and eccentric advice during trying times, but without Tim, it's hard to know who would produce those trying times. And Al Borland, Tim's co-host of the show within a show, Tool Time, would be the knowledgeable host of a conventional PBS-style home improvement show, and that would be that. An important distinction between Home Improvement and these shows is that these supporting characters are capable of playing something other than straight. Every character in Friends harbors a unique failing. Every character in Seinfeld is an asshole. Almost every character in The King of Queens has antisocial tendencies the show has zero interest in resolving by the end of each episode. The Fresh Prince is mostly surrounded by delightful weirdos. Tim, on the other hand, is surrounded by people who are rarely allowed to exhibit any failings or even really make that many jokes. It was a problem that managed to break the fourth wall. Pamela Anderson, who played the first Tool Time girl, got so bored of giving the same 2 or 3 lines every episode that she left after a couple seasons and had to be replaced. Jill was played by Patricia Richardson, who spent years insisting to the show's execs that they needed to make her character something more than just a nagging housewife. More broadly, she observed that a show so uniquely and tightly wound around one character was getting stale. As the 8th and final season was wrapping up, she was offered a huge deal to come back for a 9th, but she said, "I don't need to be rich. What I need is for this show to be over." It wasn't really Tim Allen's fault. He played a great Tim Taylor. It's just that Tim Taylor was definitionally an abrasive doofus and a selfish idiot. He held a near-total monopoly on failings and foibles, well past the point at which he could have been lovable or relatable like a George Costanza or Doug Heffernan. This, I believe, is why we've left Home Improvement in the past. No matter how wildly popular it was at the time, we don't like Tim. Which might have been fine if he were part of a Seinfeld-style rotation of Tims, but they were basically Maddox, Sclav, and Smoltz and Avery. Tim was out there all episode, every episode. He had one pitch. I'm a guy, and all guys are cavemen, and I like guy stuff. He got tired quick.
Carmen, the opera. Now, if they had an opera named Carman, I'd be there.
Great stuff, Tim. Thank you. You wish someone would come in and give him the hook, but the bullpen's empty. Tim is the only character who can produce his own humor, who can ever provoke anyone or stir the pot in any way, so he must always do so if the show is going to continue to call itself a comedy. And if that's what's always required of you, you can only be an impulsive, jittery, self-absorbed child who's insatiably greedy for attention. Not only is he desperate and annoying, he's a jerk. Many episodes end with him being shamed into being a decent husband after saying or doing something so egregious you wonder whether or not he actually wants to be married. Sometimes he's merely a goofy sitcom asshole, like the time he embarrasses Jill by airing out intimate details about her on his TV show.
Wait, I top you both. My wife drools in her sleep.
Other times, Tim is just a regular asshole, like the time he notices that Jill's car has a scrape on it.
What's this weird mark on the door?
What mark?
It's like a scratch someone tried to cover up.
When Jill explains that someone else nicked the door in the parking lot and it wasn't her fault, Tim continues to scold her anyway.
Didn't you park where no one else could park next to you?
Again, it's not even his car, it's Jill's car. Tim's not just a thoughtless buffoon, he can at times be a tough watch. He's fundamentally off-putting. As we saw there, and as we'll continue to see, he's sometimes just plain mean, often making completely unprovoked and hurtful digs at the people around him who love him and care about him the most, such as Al Borland. Good old Al. Love him. While not entirely without flaws, he's good-natured, kind, empathetic, wise, mature, and an exceptionally skilled craftsman. All the things Tim is not. Al belongs to a loose alliance of 3 characters, the others being Jill and Wilson, whose job it is to counterbalance Tim and prevent his failings from consuming the show entirely. This is a battle they lose. But unlike Jill and Wilson, Al is in a position to defy Tim and sometimes even win. These qualities are what make Al the other half of this perfect archetype, the specific qualities of which can be found in Tool Time and only in Tool Time. I, like most others, have left this show firmly in the past until now. It had its moments, its slapstick was often great, but I don't really have any particularly strong attachment to it. And I hope that serves to demonstrate just how powerful the Al and Tim archetype is, and how perfectly they represent the figures we are about to meet. An Al, as well as a Tim, can be any kind of person, not just a 1990s white guy who hosts a fictional TV show inside another fictional TV show. Perhaps you're an Al. Perhaps you've had moments in which you caught yourself being a little bit of a Tim. Perhaps you're both. Perhaps you're neither. But Als and Tims, though they have taken many different names and assumed innumerable forms, have always existed throughout humankind's journey. And here, they are in abundance. The more I explore the story of the 19th century telegraph network and the deeper I dove, the more Tims and Als I found staring right back at me through the annals of time. Samuel F.B. Morse is celebrated as the father of the telegraph, which would make him one of the most consequential figures of modern times. Sophisticated communication is one of humankind's definitional qualities. Another is the tendency to migrate and spread across the earth. Naturally, then, for ages, we've obsessed over the concept of instantly communicating with someone who's really far away. And our solutions are welcome reminders of how ingenious we're really capable of being. In the 9th century, the Byzantine Empire did some Lord of the Rings type stuff, or rather, Lord of the Rings did some Byzantine Empire type stuff, developing a network of bonfire stations on distant mountaintops that would communicate one basic message or another depending on what time of day they were lit. On and around the Great Wall of China during the Ming Dynasty, they sent messages through a combination of flames, drum beats, flags, and cannon fire. People in West Africa developed what were called talking drones, which produced a sophisticated array of sounds that could actually emulate syllables and vowels. They were loud enough to be heard the next village over and communicated anything from calls for a meeting to imminent threats. Of course, these solutions were limited by how far someone could actually hear or see something. In 1820, Danish physicist Hans Christian Ørsted discovered conclusively that electricity is up to something a little bit more impressive than simply getting really hot and creating sparks. It actually generates its own magnetic field, and what that means is that if you shoot a current down a wire, it can make a magnetic compass at the other end of that wire point one direction or the other. That wire can be really, really long, and it will still do that. Oh, baby. One of the earliest attempts at harnessing this phenomenon for the sake of communication was London's Cook and Wheatstone telegraph, a true testament to the idea that worse technology is cooler. It'll soon be outmoded, but in 1837 it's the best game in town. Somebody sitting about 20 kilometers away from here is connected to this thing by a cable that houses 5 different wires, each of which are connected to one of these 5 magnetic needles, and depending on whether the wires are hit with a positive or negative charge, they can point this way or that way. So that faraway person manipulates those wires to make the 2 needles of their choosing point to any one of these 20 letters. Obviously, there are a few letters missing, but nothing a little creative shorthand can't fix. And of course, once they send a message to you, you can use these keys down here to manipulate the wires and talk to them. So yes, you can quietly, discreetly, and instantly talk to somebody 2 towns over. This is amazing. This is something that might have gotten you burned at the stake a couple centuries prior. The problem is the wire. In this era, it's pretty much always going to be the wire. A 20-kilometer stretch is tough to maintain, especially in 19th century England, where it's subject to the whims of constant rainfall and legions of bored Dickensian street urchins. It's so prone to fouling up and breaking down that they don't even really bother trying to expand this line into a larger constellation of lines, but the discovery of electromagnetism is enough to capture the attention of the world, including that of Samuel F.B. Morse. Samuel F.B. Morse is a classic Tim, one desperate for attention and fame. His original plan was to win widespread recognition as a painter. He was technically proficient at it, his work was good for what it was, but he preferred to paint sitting portraits of politicians, aristocrats, or otherwise notable people, in part because he seemed infatuated with the ruling class and he badly wanted to be part of it. But art was going in a different direction. As Kenneth Silverman noted in his biography of Morse, Lightning Man, American art was experiencing a shift. People no longer just wanted to stare at famous guys. They wanted scenes they found familiar, celebrations of everyday life, people whose postures and expressions told stories, people who the established art world had always ignored and forgotten. And if not that, get wild with it. Take the biggest swings you can and try to capture an epic on canvas. Morse had no interest in either approach, though. He just wanted to keep on doing his sitting portraits of famous people. Which would be perfectly fine, but just like the Tool Man with his incessant jokes no one liked or wanted, Morse felt like he was owed acclaim. He should not have to evolve as an artist, everyone should come to him. When they didn't, and his career predictably fizzled out as a result, Morse gave up painting entirely and collapsed into embarrassing fits of self-pity, melodramatically describing art as a mistress who had abandoned him. So what do you do if you're a big-time crybaby and a complete loser who still wants to be world famous? You find the next wave. Accounts differ as to what actually went down during a voyage Morse takes in 1832, in which he overhears some others discussing the wonders of the electromagnet. Morse will later claim that right here on this ship, he is the first to come up with the idea of the electric telegraph. This is objectively and categorically not true. Many others had already been experimenting with this for years. But a full 5 years later, he'll be so convinced it's his idea that he actually writes a letter to the ship's captain and a few of its passengers trying to track down who spilled the beans. Even if someone did, Morse, it's your fault for flapping your yap all over the ship. However that really went down, Morse arrives home and gets to work building his telegraph. You know, the trouble is, Samuel F.E. Morse and Tim the Toolman Taylor have spent all their time in the arts, with Morse a painter and Tim a showman consumed with shoehorning stand-up material into a home improvement show, instead of going out there and getting their hands dirty. And it really shows. You want to know what it looks like when Tim tries his hand at woodworking? This. And you want to know what it looks like when Morse tries his hand at woodworking? This. The goofiness of his first telegraph prototype can be forgiven to a point, because in the field of telegraphy, pretty much everyone was an amateur at this point in history. But compared to the elegant and beautifully crafted telegraph Cook and Wheatstone were developing around the same time, this looks like... it looks like he slapped it together using some canvas frames he had left over from his failed painting career, which is exactly what he did. You're probably familiar with the universally adopted version of the telegraph, the one where you tap a little key as a dot or a dash to send signals. Instead, Morse wildly overcomplicates things by requiring you to preset this little sawtooth thing as you would a printing press in order to send a letter. Weirdly impressive in its own way, but still pretty silly. You then run that thing across this thing, which trips a battery, which sends a charge to this little electromagnet, which makes this big menacing pendulum swing back and forth, which brings us to the one game-changing innovation that we do have to give Morse a lot of credit for. At the end of the pendulum is a pencil that scrapes against this paper ribbon in order to record the signal. This is big. The Cook and Wheatstone telegraph was simple enough for anybody to use since it just pointed to letters, but the signals were ephemeral. The needles would only point for an instant, so they'd have to be sent slowly enough for the receiving party to look up, read the letter, look down, write down the letter. High potential for human error. Recording the signal automatically eliminates that potential and allows the sender to blast a message as quickly as the receiving apparatus can record it. Another crucial upside of this thing, although one I think Morse stumbled into accidentally and by necessity, it can transmit and receive a message over a single copper wire. The Cook and Wheatstone system requires several, which again means far higher production cost, maintenance cost, and potential for failure. Still, though, this thing looks like dog shit. It looks like this pendulum is gonna go haywire if anyone sneezes within a 1 mile radius, and I'm not even gonna look up what this goddamn thing does up here. Morse, are you gonna take a shower? Are you gonna signal a passing train? He needs help, man. What he needs in the worst way is a skilled machinist, a craftsman, an Al Borland. Alfred Vail. Look at that, his name's even Al. The similarities only begin there. He's generous, industrious, humble to a fault, and kind of an unheralded genius. Most importantly at the moment, he's an excellent machinist who's capable of dramatically improving and optimizing this thing. Vail happens to attend Morse's demonstration of his device at NYU and offers his services. Even better, his dad ponies up some initial investment in the use of his ironworks. Morse and Vail decide to divide and conquer, and this is when the Al-Tim dynamic really begins to present itself. Vail heads to Jersey and gets to work on designing and building new telegraph equipment that'll look a lot more similar to this. Clean, efficient, effective, built with the utmost care and craftsmanship. But elegance such as this is always wasted on a Tim whose purpose is to misuse it, if not destroy it outright.
For the filigree work around the edges, I used the Binford scroll saw.
Nice job, Al.
Every time you know he's gonna find a way to screw it up, and you think you know how dumb it's gonna be, and every time it turns out you have no idea. Morse files what's called a patent caveat, basically a sort of pre-application that you send to the patent office to let them know you're going to send them an official application later. So granted, it is kind of a rough draft, but dude, come on, man. You gotta be shitting me. The thing about doing a first, second, third draft is that they're different things. You should probably go get more paper to write on. You don't just write the second draft on top of the first draft. Some of this is in pencil, some of it's in pen. Sometimes the stuff written in pen is more important, sometimes it's not. Stuff is just crossed out instead of erased. If you squint through this crap long enough, you'll see illustrations of Morse's sawtooth apparatuses. These are the things that are fed through here. Using various combinations and keys, you can use them to signal pretty much any number you want using these 10 blocks. 1 notch for the number 1, 2 notches for the number 2, etc. Morse designates 1 notch for the number 0, then apparently realizes he already used it for the number 1, so he just scribbles a new 0 over here. What kind of shit is this, man? You gotta get it together. I think this speaks to Morse's general lack of empathy toward other people. Just as Tim is a host of a tool show and is terrible at using tools, Morse is the nominal progenitor of a system for connecting to other people who has little interest in connecting to other people. He has no regard for the poor saps in the patent office who are actually going to have to make sense of this thing. His art career torpedoed because of his total disinterest in paintings that were either of or for the common person. And just wait till you get a load of his dictionary system, which expresses nothing but outright contempt for you and me and any other unfortunate soul who might ever attempt to use it. I'm sure you're probably familiar with Morse code, right? This is definitely not that, although at first it kinda seems that way. Since you can use those sawtooth things to send numbers, those numbers are then encoded as these letters. With these letters, obviously, you can form words and sentences and paragraphs and poems and whatever you want. That's all we need. That's a wrap, right? Not if you're Samuel F.B. Morse, who has decided, for some reason, that it's also important to assign a number to every word. You know how many words there are? A lot. That's how many. You're probably asking, why do you need to assign numbers to every word when you can already spell any word you want? Let me tell you, I'm as lost as you are. I have no idea why Morse thinks this is necessary. Now, this sheet here can only fit 2,700 words. It would be bad enough if this dictionary were only 2,700 words long. This dictionary is 30,000 words long. Ironically enough, I'm at a total loss for words. This is one of the most grotesque things I've ever seen. I hate it. I hate looking at it. I'm having a bad time. So is Morse, at least. It's such a mammoth undertaking that even Silverman, his biographer, wasn't totally convinced he got all the way to 30,000 words. But we do know that Morse spent about a month losing sleep and straining his eyes by candlelight trying to finish the most pointless project of all time. The dictionary in its entirety has been lost to history, so we don't know exactly how it was laid out. According to one source I found, Morse at least front-loaded the most common words in the front of the dictionary so they were easier to look up and type, but according to a couple other sources, he didn't even do that, and just assigned the numbers in strict alphabetical order. As a result, the marquee spots in the dictionary, the numbers easiest to type in, were awarded to words like abaft, abash, abashed, abashing. I really hate this. I'm in hell. So if that's the case, let's try and game out how long it would typically take people to transmit and receive the first message that Morse and Vail demonstrate in front of the public. Railroad cars just arrived, 345 passengers. First things first, time to scour through this monstrosity and flip and flip and flip until you found the word railroad, which is number probably 23,000 or whatever. What's next? Cars. Okay, time to dive right back in. Word number, let's say 3,000 something. Just. Okay. Word number 14,778. Arrived. Oh, sweet. That's only word number 1,500 or so. 345, huh? We can actually type those numbers, so that's a piece of cake. Passengers. There it is. Number, let's say, 20,130. Each of those words must have taken 10 seconds minimum to look up, right? Then they actually had to load it up on those sawtooth blocks, which takes about as much time as setting up a printing press. Then they fire it off. Then, when the person on the other end gets the numbers, they have to look up all the words in their book and do it all over again just to decode it. It's not hard to imagine this whole process taking a full 5 minutes to send 5 words. God help you if you want to send, say, 100 words. You'd be better off just walking over there and telling them. Regardless, onlookers are astounded. For reasons you can understand, they don't care how inefficient it is. They just observe proof for the first time of someone talking to someone else while sitting in a chair miles away. It defies everything they've come to understand about what is possible. Thankfully, good sense prevails. After realizing how terrible of an idea this dictionary actually is, Morse chucks it right in the garbage in favor of the solution that should have been obvious to him all along. We, of course, know it as Morse code. Dots and dashes that signal individual letters and numbers, not words. The benefits of this are multifold, enormous, and obvious. Instead of rifling through a dictionary, you can memorize about 40 codes, 26 for letters, 10 for numbers, a few extra for this or that. Morse code is so self-evidently superior to every other telegraph communication system that it's soon adopted as the international standard. So perfect that it'll even outlast the telegraph itself and will be commonly used more than a century down the road for radio communication. Soon enough, it's coupled with Alfred Vail's far superior telegraph equipment. There are no sawtooth blocks to worry about, nothing to preset. You just tap dots and dashes into this key with your finger. And thanks to Vail's exceptional skill as a machinist, this thing is sturdy and clean and mean, right down to the electromagnet, right down to the neatly coiled wires, right down to the paper tape that feeds out of the wheel without jamming. It's beautiful. That 5-word message that used to take about 5 minutes to encode and send and receive and decode, with a little bit of practice, operators can do that in seconds. By May 24th, 1844, copper wire has been strung all the way from Baltimore to Washington, D.C. Morse mans the telegraph in D.C., Vail in Baltimore. Morse, after asking a volunteer to suggest some words to send to Vail, taps out the phrase, "What hath God wrought?" Vail receives it perfectly and repeats it right back to him as proof of receipt. That's the moment that goes down in history, but I would argue that this is not the day the internet begins. A better answer for that probably comes a few months later on the day Vail and some guy named Wills play a full game of checkers by signaling their moves along the Baltimore-Washington telegraph line. This day, November 16th, 1844, was most likely the day online gaming was born. But my preferred answer, the one that feels personally most right to me, is back on May 27th, 1844. Morse and Vail make the following exchange. "Hey, you eat dinner yet?" "Yeah." "You?" "Yeah." This is the day the internet begins. Just 12 years later, in 1856, this is what the American Telegraph Network looks like. Houston to New York, or Chicago to New Orleans, or St. Louis to Boston in practice, probably a couple hours, but in theory, an instant. An equally expansive network has simultaneously found its footing in Europe and is well on its way to Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. The Morse telegraph did this. Morse code did this. A perfect, elegant, simple code came alive and shot 50,000 miles of copper wire across a land that didn't have automobiles yet, didn't have Minnesota or Kansas yet, barely had typewriters. It is the most massive leap forward in the history of communication that humankind has experienced since the advent of written language. And you know what? A lot of people say that Samuel Morse didn't invent Morse code. They say that Alfred Vail did. And they've been saying it for a long time. And I think they're right. The prevailing view remains that Morse invented Morse code, but the more I read, the more convinced I was that Morse code probably should be called Vail code. At the bare minimum, I am completely convinced that Vail deserves far more credit than he's gotten and that Morse actively and selfishly worked to shut him out. In 1904, Alfred Vail's son Stephen wrote a letter to the New York Times asserting that his father was the true inventor of Morse code. He argued that the senior Vail not only developed the receiver, key, and code itself, but did so completely unaided by Morse, who, he argues, maneuvered tirelessly to squash any notion that Vail had anything to do with it. Included is a letter purportedly from Vail claiming that he is the sole inventor of, quote, this mode of telegraphed embossed writing, which is a little vague but is clarified in a passage from 1852 in which he says an alphabetical code first occurred to him. A compendium of letters and journals released by another of his sons is full of testimony from other people supporting this. Among the highlights, Vail's assistant, who helped him construct the telegraph device, said that Vail came up with Morse code independently. Moses S. Beach, the editor of the New York Sun, explicitly states that Alfred Vail was the one and only inventor of both Morse code and the Morse telegraph. One Reverend Josiah Canfield offers a very detailed story in which Vail was struck with the idea, went to a local newspaper and asked which letters of the alphabet were most commonly used in the English language, which would explain why E, the most commonly used letter, was assigned the simplest signal, a single dot. This detail is very significant to me. This innovation, which made transmission of code far more easy and efficient, is the exact same innovation that seems to have completely eluded Morse when he wrote his dictionary. On September 23, 1837, Vail and Morse officially entered into a business partnership. On October 3rd, Morse finished and submitted his patent caveat that described his dictionary he was planning, and it was only after this that he actually started writing it. This description included signals for individual letters. This opens up an ample window of time for Vail to have recommended to him that he should at least include the letters of the alphabet, even if he couldn't talk him out of writing the dictionary. Relevant question: why didn't Morse himself talk himself out of writing the dictionary? Morse recounted that soon after finishing the 30,000-word dictionary, he threw it out upon realizing the alphabetical code was far superior, and he argued that he never could have come to that realization until after he finished the dictionary and had some experience with using it. That he had absolutely no way of knowing how much worse of a system this would be. Pure common sense should have told him that, and if not, he could have performed some quick and basic experiments before even starting this dictionary. Tell you what, just do this, right? Just pick out a 100-word passage of whatever you want, clock how long it takes you to spell it out letter by letter in that code, and then clock how long it takes you to flip through a dictionary and find every individual word. The latter would take way longer, for sure, but by Morse's own account, it would seem that simply testing it out, a really basic component of project management, never occurred to him. Even as he worked all day and night writing this thing, doing this grueling work by candlelight, it apparently never once occurred to him to stop and ask, is there an easier way to do this? Is there a better way? Should I at least set aside half an hour to try to spell with that alphabet? So this is supposed to be our genius inventor? This is the guy who supposedly invented Morse code, a system so ingeniously perfect that it remained in use decades after World War II? This is the guy? The same guy who completely thoughtlessly reserved the money spots, the easiest to type signals for words like a baft and a bashing, words most people have never used in their entire lives? This is like if your job was to design the world's first keyboard and the T key didn't type the letter T, it typed the word Stegosaurus. A man who stares at this every waking hour for a month without any of this occurring to him is a man lacking the capacity for invention Morse code would have demanded. I'm not buying it. Morse just didn't have it in him. The modern counterargument against Vail having invented Morse code appears to largely rest on a letter Vail wrote to his father in 1838. Within, he says explicitly that Morse invented a new alphanumeric code to replace his dictionary system. Usually that would be enough to settle the matter, but it's important to remember that he wrote that in 1838. At this time, Vail and Morse's partnership was brand new and enforced a distinct junior-senior dynamic. Morse was in his late 40s, Vail was barely 30. Morse had enjoyed a decent amount of renown from his painting career before it fizzled out and was a distinguished professor at NYU. Vail was an unknown. In spite of all his brilliance at the time, he was just some dude. I think the main reason Vail entered a contract that was so favorable to Morse was that he recognized himself as the junior here. Especially believable since everything written about a young Vail describes him as a humble, selfless guy. But not infinitely so. Past a point, Vail realized he was getting taken advantage of. The terms of the partnership outlined that Vail was owed a 1/8 interest in the patent, but after the successful demonstration in 1844 that catapulted Morse to fame, Morse dragged his feet on actually registering Vail's share, and he just flat out wouldn't do it. This drove Vail up a wall, but his family advised him to remain on good terms with Morse. Vail's family, speaking of, had not only bankrolled the venture in the first place, but continued to cover expenses. Morse not only took this for granted, but seemed to throw it in Vail's face, taking Vail's family's money to put himself up in fancy hotels, while Vail himself stayed at cheap boarding houses to save money. So Morse is a known freeloader, which does not really help his case here. Morse also used Vail's family's money to print invitations to demonstrations, but while they promoted Morse, Vail's name was nowhere to be seen. When Morse was invited to meet with President Martin Van Buren, he easily could have invited Vail to come along, but as usual, Morse left him behind so he could soak up all the attention. It's true that Vail would not be in this position without Morse, but on account of Vail's ingenuity, tireless work, master craftsmanship, and Dad's money, it's equally true that Morse never in a million years would have made it here without Vail. And the thing that burned up Vail more than anything else was Morse's insistence that Vail was not his collaborator, not his partner, not his co-inventor, but his assistant.
Al's my assistant. He assists me. Al is my assistant. He assists me. I want you to listen to me. Al is my assistant. He assists me.
One of Home Improvement's many running gags was Tim's complex about being top banana. Throughout its entire run, the show dropped lots of indications that Al Borland was far more popular among viewers than Tim the Toolman Taylor. Al was far more inherently personable, and even worse, he was better at literally everything. Steady-handed as a carpenter, licensed as a crane operator, thoughtful as a project planner, he outclassed Tim in every respect. And it wasn't for lack of trying. Just like Morse straining by candlelight trying to pencil together his endless and outrageously stupid code dictionary, Tim was a relentless tryhard, getting fewer jokes to land than Al despite claiming 90% of the screen time. In spite of that, or maybe because of that, the truth was that Tim was riding Al's coattails, and that always seemed to get to him. I'm convinced that Alfred Vail deserves the credit for Morse code, and that Morse's greatest asset was his endless energy, which he expended scurrying all over the country for years to snuff out the idea that Vail was in any way responsible. And although it's far too late now, I also think it's fair to argue that at the bare minimum, the Morse telegraph should have been called the Morse and Vail telegraph. A few years before Vail died, he wrote a letter to the renowned lawyer Amos Kendall. Of course, he couldn't claim any financial compensation for having developed the telegraph thanks to the contract he'd signed. He didn't really care about that. He didn't even really care about fame. Writing, "I do not seek renown for myself. I care little for the world's applause, which at best is very hard to maintain even when justly yours, and given often where they cannot and will not discriminate and justly award. But what I do desire is truth." Samuel Morse died filthy rich at age 80. Vail died without much of anything at age 51. Years after Vail's passing, Morse gave a speech during a celebration in his own honor. He briefly mentioned Vail, but not to give him credit for any of the work he did on the telegraph, and definitely not for the code. All he gave him credit for was belonging to a family who could kick him a little bit of money. Morse owed so much to Vail, and if you ask me, almost everything. But even after Morse won it all, deification from historians, countless statues, worldwide fame that would last centuries, a long life as a rich man, he still could not find it within himself to give Vail anything close to the credit he deserved. Not even a decade after he'd been buried. Not even so that his name might ring out a little bit to make his family proud. That is a lot of things, but more than anything, it's cruel. Tim Taylor loved to insult Al's mom to his face. He did it all the time. He especially loved to do it on TV with Al standing right there. Al's mom was established to be a large woman, but she was never actually seen on camera because if they did that, Home Improvement as a show would have to confront how heartless it could be at its core. So instead, her story was told exclusively by Tim and his endless Al's mom fat jokes. Sometimes the script set him up for him, other times they came totally out of nowhere. In this scene, Al and Tim are hanging out at the hardware store and they find out it's for sale. When Al hears this, he thinks it might be cool to buy it. And I want to stress to you, that's it. That is all that's been going on here. Al and Tim haven't been fighting or arguing or anything. All right, roll the tape.
I mean, $15,000, that's a lot of money. But on the other hand, it's always been a dream of mine to own a hardware store.
It's always also been a dream of yours to be able to walk around your mom without taking a rest stop.
Whoa, dude. The sitcom asshole is a time-honored institution, but I can't think of any other character who'd say something like that totally out of nowhere. None of these characters would. Nobody on It's Always Sunny would. Hell, not even Al Bundy would. Tim's a uniquely awful guy, which stands out all the more since it's a family sitcom and he doesn't have any partners in crime. No character is willing to stoop to where he is. And unlike Seinfeld or It's Always Sunny, where the moral depravity is the joke here actually is that Al's mom is heavy. As though to drive the point home, the second to last episode of the final season, which is always the last real finale of a sitcom before all the flashbacks and waterworks start, is about Al's mom getting killed off. Guess what the episode title is? Yep. And guess whether the show exhibits any remorse at all for 8 seasons of kicking around this poor woman? Nope. The only explanation for a send-off like that is that the show's point of view is Tim Taylor's point of view. It's his show, his world. He gets to be remembered as the bumbling jokester, the lovable sitcom dad. Despite being a cruel, hateful scumbag, and loudly and perpetually so, he's never remembered that way. I think the historical record sufficiently reflects that Samuel F.B. Morse was an uncreative hack, a crybaby with an enormous sense of entitlement, a freeloader, a pathetic fame seeker who coasted on the achievements of others, a backstabbing traitor who shut out his most loyal ally the second he got a chance, and if you ask me, a fraud. He was also one of the very most malignantly racist public figures of the 19th century. Morse's crusade to bronze himself as a genius and visionary was impressively successful. By public consensus, he is the father of Morse code, and any assertions to the contrary have pretty much been limited to academic circles. And while recent years have seen the removal of statues of Confederates and the like all over the country, his statue still stands in Central Park with nothing to worry about. Few people talk about his 1863 pamphlet, which he titled An Argument on the Ethical Position of Slavery, in which he argues that slavery is a form of freedom, that slavery is part of God's plan for how humanity should work, that God created slavery as one of the, quote, great regulators of human existence. Few bring up that he says black people are, quote, degraded beings and, quote, barbarous, and that slavery is required for them to find salvation. This was not some cold, dispassionate academic diagnosis either. Samuel F.B. Morse may as well have been foaming at the mouth, particularly against anti-slavery abolitionists, who he called godless fanaticists and demons in human shape and wretched and disgusting. Morse left the Know-Nothing movement because they weren't reliably pro-slavery enough, but he did love their nativist platform, calling immigrant populations hermaphrodites. He'd been rabidly Anglo-supremacist for quite a while, having written this pamphlet, Imminent Dangers to the Free Institutions of the United States Through Foreign Immigration, in which he railed against the evils of, well, listen, I already made the mistake of reading his other pamphlet, so I'm just going to cut my losses. All this stuff is out there in the open, and it takes some work to sanitize Morse into someone who can be celebrated. One trick, one I ran into several times, is to simply say, well, he was a complex figure. Supposing he did invent the telegraph, okay, he's the inventor of the telegraph and a virulent racist. That's two things. If that's your definition of complex, the institution that issued you a PhD should be sold and reopened as a Dave & Buster's. Another trick, brushing aside all his hatefulness by describing him as a, quote, product of his time. It's not a defense I have any respect for to begin with, but if there was one person in America for whom you could not use it, it would be Samuel F.B. Morse. He was from Massachusetts, which abolished slavery well before he was born, so he did not grow up in an environment in which it was normalized. It was only along the course of his failed career as a painter, God, they're always failed painters, aren't they, that he spent time in the South and fell in love with the institution of slavery. Morse was not a product of a pro-slavery world. A pro-slavery world was his product. As Silverman observes in Lightning Man, Morse believed that, quote, technology and theology were two sides of the same thing. That what he built was a tool in service of God, and since slavery was a sacred commandment of the God he imagined, the telegraph would create and reinforce a pro-slavery monoculture. As you've probably already guessed, the intentions of those who oversaw the creation of this telegraph network were not exactly magnanimous. Sure, the right things were quite often said. Before long, people would triumph this network as a tool of unity that would bring together everyone on every continent as siblings of the great human family. The mayor of Chicago called it, quote, the great peacemaker of the age. The Nashville Tennessean declared, quote, wars are to cease, the kingdom of peace will be set up. What's the timestamp there? 1857? Oh yeah, man. For sure. Others, in all their excitement, kind of gave the game away though. The American language will become the universal language of civilized nations. It would join all mankind in the brotherhood of Christian love. We would worship the same great creator and ruler. It was about bending the world to the Anglo-American and Christian ways of living. Lofty ideas and flowery language aside, it was, obviously really all about making the rich richer. Traders could get more instant and accurate information about foreign markets and crop yields and the like. Nations including, but certainly not limited to Great Britain, could use the telegraph to more closely manage and maintain their stolen empires. This telegraph network was not built with egalitarian intent as much as they like to tell us that this technology was all about making new friends, ushering in a utopian age of world peace, and wishing a happy birthday to Meemaw and Peepaw. It wasn't. It wasn't for me, and it wasn't for you. Or at least, it wasn't meant to be. Although it doesn't happen as often as we wish it would, evil has a habit of defeating itself. By the time the telegraph network had built itself out to this point in 1856, the issue of slavery had begun to tear the Union apart. This anguished Morse, who feared the abolition of his beloved slavery, but the break was being greatly exacerbated by his supposed invention, the telegraph. People in the North had previously read accounts of slavery through books and newspapers, but those were by necessity stories from weeks, months, years ago. There was just something different about reading something that took place yesterday. The telegraph also allowed newspapers, which quickly adopted the technology, to report stories from distant parts of the country at a greater volume. Looking on in horror as the machine that bore his name accelerated war and by extension the abolition of slavery, Morse could do nothing about it except found a little pathetic fancy boy society that nobody cared about. And once war began, the North, which boasted a far more sophisticated telegraph network and was quicker to utilize the technology in the field, held a substantial advantage in the telecommunications front. President Lincoln was known to occasionally sleep on a cot in the telegraph office next to the White House, remaining in constant and instant contact with his generals. Lincoln's leadership, already massively advantageous to the North, was greatly amplified by the telegraph. The North won and slavery was abolished on account of many factors. One was the telegraph. Morse had been defeated by the Morse telegraph and by Morse code. It was, despite all his best intentions and all his kicking and screaming, a force for good. Alfred Vail is buried in Morristown, New Jersey. One of his sons made sure his relatively modest gravestone read, inventor of the dot and dash alphabet. Samuel F.B. Morse is buried in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn under a towering monument. A short walk away, only a couple hundred feet, you can visit the grave of Bashar Jackson, better known to countless millions as Pop Smoke. Not too much further away, you'll find the grave of Jean-Michel Basquiat. These are men who, in their tragically short lives, nonetheless found widespread acclaim, not through the achievements of others, but through their own creative genius. Their artistic talents were galaxies beyond Morse's. And if Morse knew that he would eternally share soil with them, it would have driven him mad. In part 2, we'll watch as this network continues to evolve into the internet we know today. A new Al and a new Tim will lead us into the next frontier.